Hello and welcome to today's painting demonstration. My name is Leah and I teach acrylic painting every week on my stream. Today I'm going to show you how to do a seasonally spooky forest, and we've got all the things we didn't hit last week, which is owls, ghosts, and some pumpkins in the foreground. Now it seems like there's a lot going on. I'm going to try to downplay some of the spooky details while making sure that we have a definite way for your eye to travel. I'm hoping down the tree and then into the far background. A lot of these color notes are going to be pretty subtle. It's going to be cool dominant with some hits of pumpkin warmth. I am going to start the same way as usual with that warm underpainting and then layer on top. If you would like to see the reference drawing and thumbnail, there's no reference photo. A lot of this is contrived out of my mind. So that is going to be for you to look at in the Discord, and the links are in the description below. So let's get started with a large filbert brush, and I'm going to be using burnt sienna and starting in the darkest areas of this painting, which are going to be the corners. Having the corners darker is going to hold your eye towards the center of the composition. I've gone relatively detailed with the background drawing. I reworked this composition many times this week, just thinking about how I can fit the things I wanted to in this painting while keeping it cohesive and not too, I don't know, Halloween collage. I really wanted to get some ghosts in, and I found it very tricky to make them not the star of the show. I'm hoping the warmth in the pumpkins is going to pull your eye more in that direction, or at least ground you, as they are on the ground, but they will pull harder than the other aspects of the painting since they are in the foreground and also warm color. I'm going to jump up to the sky, get that corner nice and dark. By having a drawing that you love and then the values in your underpainting, having that all laid out and established, you're giving yourself a really good foundation to paint on top of, which leaves a lot of the guesswork out, can make you more confident in each move. I find this very beginner friendly and less scary for people. Gives them just a bit of a guide that they can also just paint over as well. Okay, I want the side of this trees to be darker than the sky. That full moon is going to brighten up the sky. I'm going to add some texture that's a little bit storm cloud in essence. Once the first layer of paint is over that graphite, it is pretty well locked in. It's not going to move. It's not going to affect any of the light colors that you put over it. Okay, and then I want that horizon line to just blur out and disappear. I want this path to just pull you back. pull you back up into the sky. Now I'm going to switch to just a touch of cadmium yellow light for the moon and the pumpkins. Okay, so that's what we're starting with. That's going to dry. I am done with this big filbert brush. I'm going to switch over to my small filbert. And the sky color, I want it to be more of a muted blue, gray. So I'm going to take ultramarine, about half ultramarine and half burnt sienna, and you know, since I'm thinking about it, I'm going to make a pretty good amount of this color. This is going to be our darkest value. And then I'm going to make a gradient, a tint, if you will, going from the darkest value up to a light gray. And we're going to be using a bunch of this, because I don't want those cools to be too pronounced. It's looking pretty good right there. All right, now I'm going to scoot this all together. Grab some white. Go up to the edge of this pile. It's probably like a 30% gray. And then I'll take half of that pile, then mix further into that dark color. All right, now we have a nice gradient to work with throughout our painting. It's a little bit on the warmer side. Let's see. I add some cerulean blue into that middle. That'll cool it down a bit without making it too dark. Okay, I added a little bit of cerulean blue to the lightest gray, but now it's a little bit darker than I want, so grab a little bit more white, add it there. This is a more time-consuming and thoughtful part of the painting, the mixing your colors, mixing the colors that you want to pull from later. This middle gray is still a little too warm. And as a result of all that adjustment, I'm going to go ahead and mix a little bit more of that darkest value and add more ultramarine blue this time. Okay, I'm feeling a lot more happy with those. I think I'm pretty well done with that palette knife. Now I'm going to grab some of that dark color, go up in the upper left hand side for composition, and use some circular scrubbing brush strokes to simulate a little bit of a cloud pattern. Oh, it's nice to do your underpainting first and then mix your paints up, because that gives your paper a little bit of time to dry. Now I'm really only going darkest value in the very corner. And now I'm already lightening up. As I get closer to the moon, you're going to want to grab progressively lighter and lighter paint, because that moon is going to be glowing. I'm not going to worry too much about covering up these little branches that I have sketched out for myself. That lighter gray, I'm going to come all the way around this tree, painting around some of those major branches, but everything else is getting obscured and covered, and that's fine. A little bit darker coming around the side. Of that tree. Okay, so grabbing the white, I didn't bother rinsing out my brush at all, so that'll automatically make a gray. And I'm just going to go right up to the edge of that moon, and this will be our first pass around the moon. Go ahead and cover up that pencil line. And when you get a couple go-arounds, then come out from that and blend into a slightly grayer color, slightly darker, using those little scrubby brush strokes. And as you move away, you can start doing some irregular patterns to mimic some clouds, some cloud shapes. This will help make the blending look more natural as well. I mean, it can be difficult to do a smooth gradient as it is, especially a small smooth gradient in a confined little space, but if you make it a natural shape or make the texture in itself artistic, then it really helps make it look intentional and more natural. Now I'm going back for one more pass with the light gray right up against the moon. Making sure to get all those hard lines out of there. Okay, now thicker white paint inside the moon. I'm gonna put the what do you call it? I guess it's is it the butt of the paintbrush? Bristles out. Bristles out as you paint around the edge, and just keep an eye on those bristles as they sculpt the outside edge of that moon. Brushing the paint on thinner, 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 just to give it some texture and some color variation. I'm going to grab the slightest, very, very slightly darker gray paint, and I'm going to put some texture in there. Now the image I'm looking at of the moon is, I don't think it's correct. I think there is a giant crater, like, right up in here. Little moon factoid. I guess the dark side of the moon is referenced as such because it never sees light. We're always seeing the same side of the moon. I didn't realize this until recently. Oh yeah, I guess the man in the moon does always look exactly the same. Just some subtle texture there. I think it's something like that. Gonna wipe that off and pull some white paint and just add some slightly brighter areas. Not on the outside edge, but a little bit more inset. Okay, now I'm going to continue with the rest of the sky. Got my medium gray ready. If you're painting on any kind of paper product, like an illustration board, a media board, watercolor paper, then this part will be all dry by now, which will make the dry blending easier, unless you live in a very, very high humidity situation. Spooky cloud shapes. What's nice about keeping a separate thumbnail with your exact plan is that when some of this stuff gets covered up, you can just use that as your reference point. All right, now as we go closer to the horizon line, I'm gonna lighten it up. Gonna try to do that gradually as well. We're still using just the filbert brush. And all dry brushing techniques so far. Okay, now a little darker as we're away from this focal point, which is just this zone. Darker towards the edge of the painting. Make sure that blending, it doesn't have to be smooth, it just has to be natural. Similar brush strokes and similar application method is going to help with that immensely. And if something wacky starts to happen, just Stop touching it and then come back. Come back until everything's all dry. Okay, I'm gonna come down the side of the tree, the lighter paint. The lightest place besides the moon is going to be this, where this forest, this foggy forest, runs into the side of this tree. And the trees are just going to emerge out of this kind of foggy situation. I'm turning the filbert brush on its side to give us some different shapes. And I am pressing lighter than I was when I was painting the cloud shapes. That's to give us more of a deciduous tree look. I am being very careful as I'm painting along the side of our little ghosty friends. I'm being particular around about the shapes because I spent quite a big amount of time figuring out what I liked as a ghost shape. For some reason it was really bothering me. So as I'm coming down to the ground, where the ground is going to be, I'm switching to a horizontal brush stroke, more of a scrapey, it's still dry brushing, scrapey dry brush. So I want a seamless transition from what would be a vertical shape, the trees, into the ground, and I'm doing that with a really subtle transition. And now that I have the edge all put in, I can go from that light tree line down into what would be the ground. And I'm not going to do much but change the direction of the brush stroke. So from a vertical swirly brush stroke to a horizontal. Letting that get a little bit darker as I'm coming into the foreground. Going back to the medium gray. Going over that edge. That's going to give us more texture, some nice ground texture. And that medium gray is going to wrap around the front of the pumpkins and then go darker in the corners. And just go ahead and overlap those areas. You can go back and forth until you get some brush strokes that you really like. Okay, now I'm on the left side of the painting, coming up to where I imagine the flat ground would end and then the background trees are going to start, and it's somewhere around there, but we're going to keep it really vague and really obscure, dark, spooky. I'm going to go with that darker gray color, almost the darkest value. Vertical brush strokes here. This is going to be spooky tree area. As we get up towards the sky, I'm going to do that same thing I did earlier with the treetops, and using the small edge of the filbert brush, I'm going to scribble in the impression of treetops. I'm going to leave a little bit of space, but we are free to paint some negative tree shapes on there later. Grabbed a little bit of that medium gray and I'm incorporating it into the top of the darker area. You know, originally I was thinking these might be evergreen trees, but I'm scrapping that idea as we go. I think we're just going to keep with all the elm trees. Because elm trees are spooky. Sure, why not? I don't think I could point one out if I had to, but that's because of the area I'm in. Okay, medium gray, incorporating that dark side of the trees into the ground. Making sure that is somewhat smooth. And then as I come around the bottom of this bigger ghost, I'm going to lighten up that gray color back to that medium. And carefully around the edges. If you ended up having a gradient right behind your ghost, that is going to make getting around their edges trickier. Good luck. You might want to switch to a smaller brush if you're being particular, or just wing it, because we are going to put white over them. Now up through the middle. And still dry brushing. Amazing. This entire thing has just been dry brushing with filbert. What's nice though, if you use thin paint layers with this style of brush stroke, everything's drying very quickly. And if it doesn't, if it pulls, so this is happening right here, it's a good example. If you are scrubbing, like really working the paint onto your paper surface and you feel like it's lifting instead of putting down, just don't fight it. Just do yourself a favor. Don't fight it, just leave it. Do something else. Get up, get a glass of water, do anything else. Don't touch it, come back, and then just go from there. You'll be happy that you did. I always try, not always, I'm getting better. I try to like gently lay it on top, and I am often dissatisfied with the edge that creates, and then I have to come back when it's dry anyway. Except I have to wait a little bit longer because now there's fresh paint on top of it again. So that's my sincere recommendation. Okay, now I'm sure you didn't know when we were going to stop using this paintbrush. The time is now. We could put all the filberts away. We're done with them. And it is time to pick up. Let's do the tree. So we're going to go with our 1/4 inch flat. Quarter inch flat. This is fun. We're going to be adding our darkest value. The darkest value. that is our burnt sienna and ultramarine blue. It's usually 50-50, but we're going a little bit more on the cool side of things for this painting. For our cool dominant painting, that's what we're hoping for. Now I'm going to start with the bottom. Start with the bottom so that I can delicately paint around our pumpkin shapes. I want them to maintain that nice warm underpainting glow. And as I'm coming to the bottom of this painting as well, I'm just gonna make some impressions of roots down into the ground shape. Keep these kind of obscure and mystical. They'll be more believable. As I'm working my way up this tree, I gave myself some guidelines to give this tree, which is kind of more on the mystical side of things, a little bit of enchanted styling, if you will. I'm using the thinner edge of the flat brush for a little bit of a thinner line and more bristle control. I'm also going to add a little bit more water so that I get more bristle control, because the branches now at the top of this tree are going to get progressively thinner. And unlike trees that I have painted here in the past, I'm going to try to not be so controlled with their shape. I'm also going to try to let the composition of the tree speak to us. And beyond the branch that needs to be there for the owl to sit on, I'm going to just play it by ear, or brush, if you will. Just lifting that brush up progressively more as the branch gets longer and further away from the trunk. I will be going in with a script brush at the end and adding like tiny tinies. All right, now with a slightly lighter and more diluted shade of gray. So I'm going to add quite a bit of water to my brush now and go one step lighter on the gray. And those areas that we didn't paint in on the tree, I'm just going to lightly paint over those. Now, since you've diluted the paint and you stepped up a little lighter, you're going to get this nice, subtle, transparent wash over the areas that you left lighter. I'm just gonna, it'll be a good example to go right over this little owl house in the tree, and you'll see what I'm talking about. Very good. Okay, let's switch over to that script brush and do some branch work. This would be a good opportunity to paint that moon owl as well. If you want to wait for everything you just did to dry, I wouldn't blame you. You should be able to see your guidelines pretty well. Just make sure when you're using that script brush that the bristles are about 45-degree angle and that you're pulling the line with that brush. Pulling it like you're dragging a mop across the floor. I don't know why that's the first thing that I think. Here's that other little owl shape. This one's little feather fluffs on top of his head are quite maniacal looking. I have it planned to have some glowy eyes in this tree, so hopefully that works out. It won't take too much effort. The eye positions are all pretty well accounted for. I'm just going to incorporate that owl shape into this, let's call it a bark texture line. Very good. You can take a little bit of gray. This is pretty light gray. It's also pretty transparent. There's a lot of water on this brush just to keep the brush control, and I'm just gonna dab some small highlights in the eyes. They're not gonna be super pronounced. Since I have this brush rinsed out, I'm going to go ahead and use white paint. Now, if it's a little bit on the gray side, that's fine. I'm going to have a couple dabs of water on there. Go ahead and swirl it back into the white paint. Make sure there's really not too much on there. You still want really good bristle control. And we're going to touch some ghosts in. Just go around the edge. one side I've chosen the right side. I believe would be a little bit more towards the moon and that really, really foggy, glowy area in the distance. It's going to be a little bit brighter. That's going to give us the license to put a little bit of shadow on the sheets with no feets. It's okay if you're not going all the way up to that edge, because that makes them look a little bit more glowy and ethereal. Okay, now I've been dragging down from their head down to their not feet, and now with a very light gray. I'm going to drag up from the bottom. Okie dokie, that's looking pretty good. I think I'm going to shape the bottom a little bit. Now what's nice about having lots of this gray paint prepared, or gradient over here, is that I remember what I put down here not too long ago, and I can just pick that up. The wet palette is very great for acrylic painting, since blending is a challenge and paint matching, color matching rather, is a challenge. Just having it from when you used it before, very helpful. Also blending with water to get it to incorporate into what's already there, just the edges, also very helpful. I think those ghost shapes are looking pretty good. Just one little highlight on the head. There we go. They're looking misty. Is it time for branches? It might be time for branches. It's always like slightly scary to do branches. Now you can go from the darkest value to the mid value gray on the branches, and that'll all just be fine. Might even look better on the skinniest ones if you went more mid value. Just don't let them get lighter than the background trees. I'm going to try to get sketchy. Rolling up my sleeves for this, of course. As the branches get smaller, they will also get shorter, because they have not been growing for as long as their previous part. Now, if you're clever, you can fix any kind of wonky blending you have going on. And this branch right here got a little thick towards the end, so I'm gonna just go ahead. This is tree branch problem solving. Gonna make it a little bit thicker, going towards the trunk. Help make that look a lot more believable. And then I'll just extend that out. There we go, that looks a lot better. This is bringing it back around. It is a lot easier to keep your branches thinner at the tip if you are working from the main tree side and then out. Okay, I think that's looking pretty good on that tree. This tree is definitely like all one direction, which is kind of nice. I think it really works for this. Okay, that's all looking really good. I still haven't decided whether that second owl is going to get any eyeballs. The ghosts are drying well. Now we're going to go to our pumpkin stems. Now, because this pumpkin stem is in front of this really dark value tree, I'm going to want to make that a lighter value. And I'm thinking somewhere in between this 30 or 40% gray and the middle one is going to be good for our purposes. Now I'm still using the script brush, and I'm going to want enough water in that to keep control of this thing. Now, if you're really intent on getting that little loop-de-loop, make sure to keep your wrist down. That's going to help out a bunch. Keep your wrist down, hold your breath. Make sure that there's just enough water to get you there, but not too transparent as to where you have to go over it twice, because that's 2 times you have to make that little journey. There is stem number 2, and then stem number 3 is a smaller stem, smaller pumpkin. Now I'm going to let that dry, and I'm leaving those bright orange areas there. I'm going to do the same thing that I did with the tree and just do a light wash over those, but only after that first coat of gray is dry. I'm thinking I'm going to want to switch brushes away from the script brush now to a point. And the size I'm going with today is going to be I think I might be missing a couple of these. So I'll go with number 1 in lieu of a number 2. That's fine. So now I'm on the pumpkins, right? I want them to be not too bright. So I'm going to use burnt sienna and cadmium yellow to make my orange. It's a little bit of an earthier orange, which fits into the tone of this scene. Now I'm adding a little bit more yellow to the top edge. I'm going to start with that yellow and on the inside edge of the pumpkins that face towards the moon, I'm just going to put that lighter orange down. Now picking up the darker orange. I'm going to put in the little sculpted lines and outline the rest of it. And just drag towards the middle. You can go all the way down to normal burnt sienna at the bottom of the pumpkins. Give them a little bit more form. This one here is going to be the darkest for sure. I think bigger brush strokes will do us well on that bigger pumpkin. It's looking too choppy, overworked. Choppy and overworked, I say, and you can fix some of that by just going over it with a bigger brush. If you can fit it there, that'll help you out immensely. The biggest brush stroke you can fit on there. There we go. Okay, now you can put that light to medium. Heavy on water, light on paint. Medium gray. Over the stems. One more time. Now if you put too much paint on it, like I just did, you can dab that off with some water off your brush and then just go back. And there you go. You should be able to get that subtle amount of underpainting coming through. Okay, this is looking good. I think we are going to brighten up some owl eyes. I'm going to use that #1 point brush to do this. I'm going up to the light gray. I have some yellow in my brush, which, you know what? I'm going to leave that. I think that's going to be fine. I'm not going to overlap the entire area that's already been painted. I'm just going to add a little highlight to it. Put a little too much paint down, so I just went ahead and wicked that back up. Feeling those owl eyes a little bit wacky on the shaping. I'm going to add a little bit more space between them by just taking a script brush and that darkest value and carving out some area between, making them a little bit smaller, although that was scary. Shaping the ear a little bit more. Or feather tuft. Okay, good. Now that bigger point brush that I grabbed a moment ago, that's a #4. And make sure that's nice and well cleaned out in our cleaner water. Then I'm going to dab that. So I'm about to do some more dry brushing. Now that most of the details have been worked out, I am going to just bump up this fog in the distance. Just a little bit of paint here. Paintbrush is mostly dry, and I'm gonna pick a spot right up against this tree and be careful not to get any on the tree because I don't want that. And I'm just going to swirl little tight swirls. I'm going to drag the paint out from that area and up and out towards the little ghosts. I'm not adding any more paint to the brush, I'm just dragging it away. Good, I like that. And also the lightness on the eyes turned out well. I think that's good. I don't know if we need any negative shapes in those trees. I feel like that's probably fine. You know what I might do though, just to break up some of this space here. I feel like there's too much void right there. Since I'm not going to cut out any tree shapes, I'm going to grab the script brush, and that's going to be the darker gray. And from that color, I'm just going to make some barren tree branches coming up out of it. They're just going to be vague, not really attached to anything, and they're going to be reaching towards our ghosty guys. And I'm just going to keep on doing them all the way back into the color that they came from. So they'll just disappear into the fog. Disappear into the fog and the darkness. These are very low contrast, just using them to break up that expansive space. I did like that, that was good. Okay, this is one of these decisions that I wish I had an undo because I don't know how this is going to turn out. You could stop now, just telling you. Fair warning. It's light gray, there's a fair amount of water in there for brush control. Very, very dainty, vague shapes, little branch shapes. They don't necessarily need to connect to anything because they are so low contrast and big. They're not necessarily attached to anything big. I'm just adding some interest and some texture. Now, if you're fast, you can fix some of those with just a little bit of water. And just lightly lift those off of the area that you didn't like. Okay. I think I'm going to darken up the area around this bird here, the bird in the tree. Like that's a little high contrast. Okay. Very good. Originally, I was thinking of putting some little orange leaves along this path, but it almost doesn't need it because there's little tiny pops of warmth coming forward. Maybe if we keep them obscure So I'm holding the flat brush at an angle, and I'm just going to change the angle of the brush as I put these down. And they're going to get smaller as they go into the distance, a little bit lighter on the paint as well. And bigger and thicker in the foreground. Good. Actually, I like that incorporation right there. That was good. And sometimes, you know, if you're adding a lot of water to paint as it dries, it's going to be more transparent than you would have anticipated or guessed. And in this case, I'm going to put one more layer of thick paint right on the, and this is the thickest paint that's going to be on our painting right there. Might throw a little bit of it on the moon. Just on that edge that carries us towards the tree. Okay, fantastic. I think we're done, and that's looking good. I'm pretty happy with that. That's a good spooky forest number 2. And I hope you enjoyed painting along to this week, and I look forward to seeing you next week for our next monthly theme. So until next time, happy painting.